Hi, Lex. So, as we're wrapping up 2025, I thought I'd touch base with you and see what you thought was some of the most interesting science on Data 2 published this year.
Sure, Mary. There's been a fair number of articles with interesting case studies and some really deep science about the role ADA2 plays in the body. To begin with, I'd like to talk about a very interesting study out of the laboratory of Dr. Isabel Metz in Belgium. Her research group explored the issue of DATA2 carriers who have symptoms.
Well, as the person who answers the Data 2 Foundation's email and administers the Facebook group, I really know that this is a frequent topic of discussion, carriers who sometimes have pretty severe symptoms. So I'd like to start as background. We've always called Data 2 an autosomal recessive disease. Can you explain exactly what that means?
When we say a disease is autosomal recessive, we're talking about how it is inherited. Autosomal means the gene involved is on one of the numbered chromosomes, not on the X or Y chromosome. So it affects all genders equally. Recessive means you need two copies of the non-working gene to actually have the disease, one from your mother and one from your father. If you have just one faulty copy, you're called a carrier. And traditionally, we say that carriers are unaffected.
Okay, so all those carriers with whom I've interacted or I've seen their posts on Facebook talking about their symptoms, I know that that is just anecdotal evidence and does not prove science. So tell me what this new study reveals about carriers.
Well, first, let me emphasize that this study is really the first that tackles the issue of symptomatic carriers, which has been a hotly debated topic within our scientific network. It points in the direction for further study and will need to be confirmed by others.
So it's really a promising first step in understanding how carriers may be symptomatic, but we have to allow the scientific process to keep doing its work to confirm and expand their findings.
Right.
Okay, so with that caveat in mind, what exactly did they find?
The big takeaway from this study is that DATA2 may not be purely an autosomal recessive disease the way we have always thought. The researchers found a small group of patients who had clear DATA2-like symptoms, things like vasculitis, stroke, and immune problems, but they only carried one DATA2 mutation, not two. So they dug deeper into understanding why, and what they discovered was that certain variants of ADA2 gene actually behave in a dominant negative way.
Can you explain what exactly that means?
That means that the faulty copy of the gene actively interferes with the normal copy. When they modeled this in the lab by putting the normal and mutant proteins together, they saw a much lower ADA2 secretion and lower enzyme activity than you would have expected from a single mutation. So even one bad copy can cause trouble if it's one of these dominant negative variants. But this only occurs with certain variants, which is why not every carrier experiences symptoms and why this was not recognized until recently.
So, how did they verify what to me seems like an observation in this very small group of patients?
Well, they then looked at large population biobanks, genetic databases, and found that some of these variants are associated with a higher risk of having DATA2-like clinical problems, even in the carrier state. What this means practically is very important. It shows that the old rule of carriers are unaffected may not always be true for DATA2. Some carriers may indeed develop the disease. For clinicians, if a patient looks like they have DATA2, but only one variant is found, this means you cannot automatically rule out DATA2. And for families, the genetics and the counseling become a bit more complex. Overall, the study expands our understanding of how ADA2 mutations work and shows that the biology is more nuanced than a simple autosomal recessive model.
So, what would be the next steps to confirm or clarify this study?
The next step is really to confirm this in larger groups. We need more families with these specific variants and careful tracking of which relatives have symptoms and which relatives do not. We also need real-world measurements of ADA2 activity in the blood of people who carry these variants. When you combine that with larger population studies, it will help us understand how often these variants actually lead to disease. In short, bigger numbers, clearer biology, long-term follow-up to see which carriers become truly symptomatic.
Well, that sounds like it's a job for the Data2 patient registry.
Absolutely. The patient registry will be invaluable in tracking the data on carriers with different mutations and their respective symptoms. Of course, the most important outcome is to identify DATA2 carriers with symptoms and ensure that they receive the best possible treatment.
Absolutely. So we're going to save the discussion on the registry for another time, but thanks for explaining this exciting new study. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's really looking forward to seeing how this line of research plays out. Thanks so much, Lex.
You bet, Mary. Thank you.